Welcome to the Corporate Scrutiny Panel meeting on the 10th of September 2020. Just to let people know that the meeting is being recorded and webcast, and so that might inform how you go about things. My name's Andrew Cooper. I'm the chair of this panel, and if the members of the panel can just quickly introduce themselves. Starting with Will.
Hi, I'm Councillor Will Simpson, a ward councillor for Denby Dale.
James.
Yeah, I'm Councillor James Homewood, representing the Ashborough ward.
Councillor Taylor.
Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, John. The other John.
Councillor John Lawson, representing Cleckheaton.
Mahmood.
Councillor Batley East.
Okay. Councillor Turner.
Sorry, I was a bit late. Somebody forgot to send me the link, so I've had to come through a different route. I couldn't get in. So yes, Councillor Turner, corporate cabinet member.
Okay. Philip.
Philip Challoner, public co-optee.
Right. Welcome everybody. First item: minutes of the previous meeting. Is there anything anybody wishes to raise under the minutes of the previous meeting? No. Okay. First item done. Any interests that members wish to declare? No. Admission of the public. Are we admitting the public to this meeting? Yep. Okay. Yes, we are. Any deputations or petitions?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions by members of the public?
Again, no written questions received.
Excellent. The council plan was on the agenda, but we're going to come to that later, as I understand it. Andy Simcox, do you want to say any quick words about this at all?
Yes, so remember, come on camera and unmute. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, if I can give it just a brief bit of information on that, and also something relating to a later agenda item as well, if that's okay. Councillor Cooper and I had a conversation last week, and unfortunately after the agenda had been published, where I explained this point, because further work is needed, we would not be in a position to share the draft council plan beyond describing the approach that we will be taking, and that as we'd already done that at the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, there's a danger of wasting everybody's time by repeating ourselves in that, and also not properly engaging in the content. That will become available closer to the cabinet and council meetings that are scheduled for later dates. So what we discussed was that it would be better to arrange a further, what I'd like to suggest is an informal corporate scrutiny panel meeting to share that draft and have a more in-depth discussion that we can feed into the final version to be prepared for cabinet. And we need to set a date for that. That was what I discussed with Councillor Cooper. What I'd like to add is that further to that, and I'm sorry to say with regards to item 8, tackling inequalities, unfortunately the officers who have done all of the preparatory work and would have been here today to represent that item are in one case unwell, and in the other having to deal with 2 family emergencies today that leave them indisposed. So they're therefore unable to represent the item, and with the notice in availability, we're not able to cover. Now, what I would like to suggest, with your permission, is that as the approach to tackling inequalities will be so strongly connected to the draft council plan, that we could also pick that item up at the informal session to be arranged to consider the council plan. And that's what I'd like to suggest, please. And just again to offer my apologies in both cases, but I hope you consider this a pragmatic alternative.
Okay. These things happen, Andy. When do you think we might be looking for this informal meeting?
Well, when we talked last week, we were talking about sometime between the 15th and the 22nd of September. But again, I guess dependent upon diary and availabilities, we're keen to get to talk to as many of you as we can. So there is time after that, right, if it can be fit as well. So I'm happy to work with Jenny if you're happy to do that. That gets as many of you there as can possibly be the case.
Okay, appreciate that. Members, any comments from members on this? Nope. Okay. Thanks for that. So we move.
Andrew did indicate both.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. I didn't see you. Go on, John.
I'm fine with this, Andy. My only request will be that we are provided with some information in advance of us meeting to discuss it, because it's very, very difficult if we come to one of these meetings and there's a presentation. You expect us, I mean, I don't know about other members of the committee, but I'm a bit of a reflector. So I like to have something, read it, digest it, reflect on it, and then feedback. So I'm fine with arranging a meeting, a date to be convenient, but can we have the information beforehand just so we've got a chance to reflect on it? That's all, really.
That's a reasonable request. So if we can have information early on, presentations, just so even if we just got a day or two, just have a look over it. That'd be good for me as well. I appreciate that.
No.
Any comments? Right. Okay, Andy. Any comments from any of the members? Okay, we'll now move swiftly on to the people strategy. Deborah. Okay, Deborah, Lucas.
Hi, I really do apologise, but I keep the internet doesn't.
Oh, it's a bit Norman Collier, isn't it? Is this going to be one of them days?
It does feel like one of those days, doesn't it, already?
I don't know. You will know that some of the people on here won't know the reference to Norman Collier.
Showing my age, Emma.
And mine by knowing what you mean.
Now the phone's going. Oh, God.
Well, I have no idea what you're talking about, I have to say.
Might be Deborah ringing in, Andrew.
I don't know. I think she'd probably ring into Jenny or somebody, I would have thought. Okay, so, right. Okay. Deborah, anything? Are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
As soon as everybody switches their cameras on, my internet seems to crash.
Okay, shall we turn our cameras off so we can just hear you? Shall we do that?
Yeah, would you mind just while I speak and then maybe try and switch them back on? Sorry about this.
Okay, off you go.
Right. Okay. Can I just check you can hear me?
Yes.
Right, perfect. I'll leave mine on. If I start losing connectivity, I'll switch mine off. Okay, so I was about to say it's really lovely to see everybody, but then obviously everything got switched off because I haven't seen you all for ages. But anyway, there we go. It was lovely to briefly see you. So I last presented to you back in February, and the report I'm presenting today builds on the 3 previous reports that I've submitted to you. Which reflect the 3 strands of the people strategy. So that's around wellbeing, development and attraction. And when I spoke to you in February, I was updating you on the work we were doing specifically around talent attraction. And I also explained that we were about to undertake a refresh of the people strategy and invited comments from this committee to inform that refresh. Back in February, if you recall, some of the key points that you raised that you wanted us to incorporate were things around looking at a more flexible approach to staff benefits, looking at better induction process, better tracking of internal promotions through our recruitment system, raising awareness around credit unions. We talked about better storytelling in relation to our staff. There was a piece around valuing our working carers and also being mindful of climate change. So what I want to start off with is that just to confirm that all of these points have either been or are being picked up as part of the refresh. So again, as you'll be aware from the last time I presented here, we had a whole load of engagement sessions planned with various stakeholders around the refresh. And then unfortunately, within about 4 weeks of me presenting, we went into lockdown. So what we had to do was we had to quickly rethink and replan our engagement strategy. So rather than doing the face-to-face focus groups in all the engagement sessions we had planned, what we decided to do was to draw upon, there was a lot of intelligence at the time and learning that was coming out of the lockdown experience. And what I'd say is this has and continues to be a really dynamic process where we're continuously learning from everything that's coming out of things like we've been doing monthly staff pulse surveys focusing on various aspects of wellbeing. We've been doing good to see you circles that have been capturing how staff are feeling, how people are coping during the pandemic, listening to suggestions from staff about what we can do to make improvements. There's a lot of work that's come out of the recovery framework and the refresh of the corporate plan. And we've also taken into account, you'll be aware of all the inequalities work that's been taking place, that's been brought to the fore, in particular by the impact of the pandemic on our BAME communities and Black Lives Matter movement. And we have managed to hold a number of targeted virtual working groups with staff on key matters such as induction and leadership development. So I think in my report, I've set out some key learning points and reflections that have been informing our people strategy refresh. So I'm not going to go into everything in any level of detail, but essentially I think what I would say is this crisis has really highlighted how flexible our workforce has been to change. It's given us a real insight into what staff value in terms of our benefits and supporting their well-being, and it's also really shown us how much talent we've got in our workforce and how we can harness that talent and develop it. And the crisis has also really brought to the fore a number of key values that have really shone through around kindness, inclusion, and a real sense of pride in working for Kirklees. So we've probably learnt more from the pandemic in terms of informing our people strategy than we probably ever would have done. So the refresh work is really shaping up into a programme of work that's spanning 3 core areas now, and there are a number of projects that sit beneath each of these areas. And if I can refer you to Appendix 2 in your documents, and I'll talk you through, just again, there's so much work going on, but I will just give you some key highlights of the work that's underway. And again, what I would add is that given the current situation, much of this work is being looked at through a COVID lens at the moment. So if we look at the first part of the programme under culture change, one of the projects we're looking at is that visual refresh of the people strategy. How do we present it? What does it look like? And what we really want to do is bring the strategy to life rather than it be a wordy sort of document. We want it to be something that's visual, that's impactful, like a plan on a page, something that will be really easy to communicate with staff and easy for people to understand and engage with. So we're working with IT and comms colleagues to support us with how we present this alongside a campaign to communicate it across the workforce. And our ambition is that we will launch this visual refresh in January. Another key project in this area that we're working on is called the Employee Portal. We've always known for a long time how difficult it is to achieve timely and effective engagement with our frontline workers. And again, the crisis has really brought this to the fore. And we need an urgent solution, not just to ensure that staff receive timely messages, but also to ensure that they're able to access all the support that they need at work. So far, we've constantly been reliant upon messages getting through to staff either through line management structures, through hard copy communications, and it really isn't effective. It doesn't give us that timely engagement with that cohort of workers. So this piece of work has become a real priority for us to find a digital solution that enables that two-way engagement. You'll be aware we've already had 2 pulse surveys that have had different focuses around wellbeing, and we've got a pulse survey number 3, which is planned to be launched next week, and the real focus of that is going to be on questions that help us to understand the digital capabilities of our workforce. We're going to be looking at capturing what existing devices staff use, what their preferred methods of communication are. And we're already on with working with IT colleagues to identify what that digital solution might look like. And what we're also going to do is use this as an opportunity to upskill staff where we find that there might be areas of skills gaps that need to be addressed. And I think we anticipate that this will be particularly helpful to improve the digital skills of our frontline staff. In terms of this project, I think it's going to be critical in transforming the culture of our frontline workforce so that they are truly engaged in everything that we do to support our staff, whether that's be from the wellbeing offer and development opportunities to simple things that some of us just take for granted, like being able to have instant access to an online payslip or receiving regular updates about what's going on in the organisation. So that's going to be a really, really important project for us, in particular around changing that culture. If I quickly move on to wellbeing, I just want to highlight a key project that's in the area about staff benefits. And I know this was something that you were keen for us to look at when we last spoke. So as part of the refresh, we've been doing a lot of work in this area, and we've been doing that work in terms of short, medium and longer term. So in the short term, we've been looking at how we reward and motivate staff, especially during a period of crisis. Some examples of what we've been doing include sending out thank you packs primarily to our frontline workers, and they were sent out as sort of that simple gesture to recognise all their hard work during this pandemic. And the packs included things like tea bags, biscuits, hand creams, bath soaks, etc. And they were all sourced from our local businesses who either donated items to us or sold them to us at a discounted price. The feedback we got from staff was really positive, and they really welcomed the recognition. So that worked really well. We've also continued with our High Five Awards during the pandemic. We felt it was really important that we carry on recognising people with those simple thank yous. And we're building on this by adding in additional rewards by way of, we're doing prize draws whereby staff can win special prizes, spa days, beauty treatments, a dinner out in a local restaurant, hopefully. And again, these prizes have been donated by local companies who recognise the hard work of our people. One other thing, again, and I know this committee raised it, was learning from our first Pulse survey, which I know I've included a summary of the results of that at Appendix 4. Some staff were telling us that they were worried about their financial well-being. So again, looking at the short-term kind of project here, we use that as an opportunity to communicate what financial support and the benefits we have to offer staff. And one of the key benefits comes out of our partnership with our credit unions and the access that staff can get to preferential rates for savings and loans. So we've really promoted these during the crisis, and as a result we have seen an increase in take-up, and that's in particular in the area of staff access in credit union benefits such as saving money and also obtaining preferential rates on loans. In the medium to longer term, this project is also looking at a total flexible reward package for our staff. And this is looking at the benefits that are most attractive to different generations, different types of workers, with the aim of achieving kind of a pick and mix approach to the benefits package, so that we don't just have this one size fits all, because like I said, we recognise that different things matter to different people at different times in their lives. And finally, just to move quickly on to workforce planning, and this is the biggest area for us over the next sort of couple of years, really. And we've got a huge programme of work underway in this area. And I think back in February, I talked to you about we were planning the implementation of a new recruitment system. And had we not had the pandemic, I would probably be here today talking to you about, OK, we've got a new system in. How do we shift the organisation culture towards more online attraction, more online recruitment methods? So I'd probably say one positive thing that the pandemic has done for us, it's practically forced that transition overnight. So we've successfully implemented the new system, and almost 100% of recruitment now takes place virtually. And again, the feedback we've had from managers and from candidates has been incredibly positive, so much so that I think even when services recover and staff start to return to office spaces, it's unlikely that we will ever go back to how we worked before and face-to-face interviews. Obviously, virtual recruitment, it's not only more efficient for panels and for candidates, but it also provides much more flexibility around when we can hold interviews. As well as obviously obvious things like saving on travel, time, expense, and supporting our climate change agenda. And what the new system offers us is that powerful intelligence to track candidates. Again, I know this was something that was mentioned last time about being able to track candidates through the system. And this helps us identify at what point candidates might fall out of a process, which is particularly important for us in relation to monitoring underrepresented groups in the workforce, so we can actually target our resources in the right areas and at the right stage of the process so that we improve outcomes for those candidates. and obviously ultimately achieve a workforce that's representative of the communities we serve. One important development that we're going to be implementing at the end of this month is full blind recruitment. What that means is that as well as not being able to identify characteristics of candidates such as gender, age, disability, etc., recruiting managers will also only see candidate number and not the full name. And what this does is it helps us to remove that potential unconscious bias at that shortlisting stage, and is also proven to improve employment opportunities and build trust with underrepresented groups. As well as attracting underrepresented groups in the workforce, I think we also recognise that once in our employment, we really need to focus more on developing these groups of staff so that we not only retain them, but we support them to grow and move up the organisation. A key group of staff that are underrepresented at a senior level in the organisation are staff from a Black or minority ethnic group. We've done a lot of work on this, and to address it, we've put in place a whole programme of leadership and development sessions targeted at BAME colleagues. Just a few examples. So we will shortly be offering a level 3 leadership and management programme targeted at BAME colleagues who are looking to develop at team leader level. We also have a regional level 5 leadership and management development programme, which is led by Solace. This again will be targeted at BAME colleagues who are wanting to move to that next level of leadership in the organisation. And we are at the very early stage of having a dialogue with the West Yorkshire and Humber Partnership about offering a level 7 BAME Fellowship Leadership Programme, which we're hoping we'll have that in place for perhaps May next year. I think overall our ambition is that these targeted programmes will support our BAME colleagues to develop through the organisation into senior roles, which will bring a real richness and diversity to leadership across the council. In addition to the targeted leadership programmes, we're also refreshing our existing leadership management horizons framework to support the development of all staff across the workforce. So I think I'll probably stop there. I could go on. There's lots and lots and lots of work happening across the whole of the programme. And these literally are just some key highlights of work that's underway. So I'm happy to take questions and hear your feedback on the work that's happening and on the refresh. And I have invited members of my leadership team here in case you've got any detailed questions about any specific projects that they might be leading on. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for that, Deborah. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Deborah. Always appreciate these sessions, and there's always a lot of value to them. I think the one thing that struck me that I was really pleased to see under 4.4.2 was about the recognition of working carers. It's just something I've talked about for a while now. And I'm really, really pleased to see there's starting to be a bit of focus on that, because I think they, as it says in this report, you know, they will have higher anxiety and stress levels, not just because of COVID, just because of the balancing that they're trying to do in terms of caring and pursuing their career. I do have a couple of concerns as well. We talk an awful lot about inclusivity and diversity, but when I look at the on page 37, we've got the people strategy and who's leading on what particular aspect of work. There's no men. Every single person that's named is female, and I just wonder, have you within your own team thought about inclusion and diversity and making sure that that there is that gender balance within your own team and your own leadership? So that's probably something just to reflect on, not necessarily to comment on. And my other comment, and I raised this in multiple forums, the one thing we don't seem to measure and the one thing that we don't seem to recognise is one of the groups that has the least beneficial outcome is young white working class males. And until we start gathering the intelligence on that, we can't start measuring it. And until we start measuring it, we can't ensure that we're being inclusive and diverse to all groups, because that group is underrepresented. And I should imagine if we looked at the senior leadership across Kirklees, you would find that the vast majority of the white males within that will come from a middle class background. So I'd ask if you would please comment on what we're doing, because this isn't the first time I've raised this. I've been talking about this for a couple of years. What are we actively doing to start to measure that? So I agree with everything we're doing to support colleagues in other disadvantaged groups, but we're ignoring one, and I don't think that's fair. And I'll leave it there for a moment.
Okay, Deborah, do you want to respond to that before we go to the next question? I don't know how we'd actually measure class, actually. That's always an interesting thing.
You measure it by their parents' occupation.
Yeah, you can do. That makes me working class, I think, but there we go. Right, carry on. What do you think, Deborah?
Yeah, so obviously I know it has been raised before, Councillor Taylor, and it is difficult to measure that class, and we don't have a measure in terms of the employment. What we do measure is we measure age, we measure ethnicity. Obviously, we measure gender, and I suppose what I would say is that our workforce is reflective in general of the local authority workforce. Every local authority tends to be primarily 70% female, 30% male. That's the nature of the work that we do. So I suppose what we probably need to do is we need to look intelligently at what data we have and how we might measure it better, so that we can actually see whether we do have a problem in terms of young white male working class males.
What we see is throughout their life they have worse outcomes. So just as we are quite rightly focusing on BME communities because over their life they have worse outcomes, we are ignoring a group. We're just ignoring them. We need to start to take some action to treat them in the same way as we treat other groups. And until we start gathering the data and until we start focusing on that, and to turn around and say that, like other councils, 70% of the workforce is female, 30% is male, well, that isn't recognising. So that suggests that we are doing something plainly wrong because we've got an imbalance in gender. So what are we doing to tackle that? Because I never hear anything about what we're doing to tackle that. And if we're truly being inclusive and diverse, we should reflect our population. And we're trying to do that in some areas, and you've talked quite rightly about what we're doing to try and help those in the BME community. So what are we doing to help men?
Okay, I think that message is heard, Councillor Taylor, and yeah, you are a strong advocate for this area. I recognise I've heard this a number of times.
But I'd like answers, not just that the message is being heard. I'd like to know what actions are going to be taken as a result of that message being heard.
Okay, well, I can take that back, and I can look at. I will look again at the makeup of the workforce and look at outcomes. In particular, what we can do is we can track through young male employees and track through the progress that they make. I'll need to talk to our intelligence and performance colleagues about how best to do that, because as I say, we don't know the background in terms of the class of people that we employ. So all I can see is age, ethnicity, and gender.
You're absolutely right, Deborah. I don't want to give you a hard time about it, but until we start capturing information, we'll never get that intelligence. So the first step is going back and saying, well, if we're doing pulse surveys, can we add another question in so we're capturing that information? Because until we capture the information, we can't do any. You can't fix the problem until you know what the scale of the problem is, can you?
No,
but if
that's
we don't
right.
start collecting the data, we're never going to be able to address the problem. I'd like to have it, if we can have it minuted, that we will come back and formally respond of how we're going to tackle this, because we keep talking about it. And as Andrew rightly says, I raise this in a variety of forums. I've even raised it at full council in the past when we brought the people strategy through. And like with the working
yesterday,
parents, I raised that at full council. We've done something about that. So I'm really, really pleased that, we are listening, but we do need to listen to all of our workforce and all of the people in our communities and be reflective of that.
I think you make a good point when you talk about obviously the working class aspect of it. If you look at men more generally, we generally do pretty well in society as a whole, I think, and I think we've probably got to look at how that reflects in relation to things like business and those sort of areas, the private sector, where men do a lot better, and you sort of wonder whether there's a balancing aspect to this. But I think we could go into a big debate about that now, but let's not. But I think we've heard you, John. That'll be taken away, and now move on to Philip.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I think there seems to me, from a sort of an overall aspect, an incredible piece of work gone into this strategy and developing a strategy, and I think that's excellent. And I think it's excellent that you're looking at different pathways to help develop people. There will be also those members of teams, properly towards the front line perhaps, who aren't looking for development, but looking for security and sort of self-esteem in the roles they have. And I don't know whether we can measure that in some way. And I know you've been sort of looking after the situation with the COVID pressures on staff. I think that's quite important, because some people don't want to sort of climb the ladder, as it were, but want to be able to do their job well, adapt to the changes that are inevitably going to happen, and be recognised for that. That's one point I'd like to make, and perhaps you could come back on that. There was I go back to acronyms, and I can cope with most acronyms. There's one acronym on page 39 under employment and well-being, which is presumably the data system, because it's EOPAS. Could you tell me what that is?
Yeah, I can't tell you what it stands for. I can't commit to that. But what it is, it's our new system that's going to support us around the whole well-being. The whole well-being aspect, in terms of again, us being able to move to a digital solution. At the moment, when people book in with employee healthcare for whatever, it's dealt with manually. So this will give us a digital solution that again will then be able to help us to track outcomes for people. So we will know when people were referred. We will know if people were in work, off work at that time, and then be able to track progress and see which interventions are working and which ones aren't.
Well,
so,
that's
yeah, it's the system.
So that comes back to the digital side of things. I mean, most people, I hope, are reasonably digital aware, but some people would not have their own ability or financial capacity to run broadband and stuff like that. Therefore, they would need to have access to digital tools within a hub or somewhere like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I've finished.
John Lawson, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is hi Deborah. This is a very exciting piece of work. It goes through the whole of council. Very exciting to see its progress. I mentioned it last night that it was coming to corporate scrutiny today, and about ways we address pay gap and how people feel about where they work and live. And this is obviously all about that. And it's I think the way that this is presented has been particularly useful, especially seeing the Pulse One results next to our strategy, because that sort of just gives a kind of what we want and what we have in a quite a clear picture, and that's quite nice to see. So, for example, we saw that maybe 2/3 of people weren't sure about how to access financial information from council at one point, and I thought, well, that's once you've identified that, then you've got something you can work with, haven't you? You can go back into that and do a piece of work about that. I think there is a couple of things about. You mentioned the COVID stuff quite rightly. Of course, it's just fundamental to what we're doing right now. Has there anything been identified, do you think, that can be successfully left behind that was not perhaps useful in the past? I'm thinking that maybe home working might present opportunities to leave something behind about commuting and things like that, and make a positive out of leaving something negative behind, if you like. But I mean, in the same way, we have to sort of think about the work that we're doing with staff, especially about making sure that they don't live at work, so that they can organise their home working properly, and actually make sure that they're getting rest time as they should do, as they would do it at the workplace. So, and that's a little bit about introducing how do you discipline yourself to work from home? Because I'm sure everybody in this virtual room now is is learning to do that right now, and how to sort of build rests into your life. So that's another point. I'd make one more point as well about the attraction, employee interaction side. I'm not sure whether we do or not, but do we have a kind of a formal or an organized process of following people's careers after they've left us, in the hope of attracting boomerang candidates, if you like, or an apron string approach, if you like? I'm just thinking that following people's careers after they've left us, because I know it's senior interviews for senior posts, we sometimes have ex-employees who've come back at a different level. And if we could attract those in greater numbers, that might be a really interesting prospect, to sort of garner that talent and garner some of the wealth that we've spent time investing in. It's gone elsewhere, but let's have it back again. Thanks. That's all from me. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks. Should I come back on a couple of those points? So,
yes, please.
So in terms of that's about tracking people's careers, I suppose the simple answer is no, we don't formal. But what we do, it's more of that informal tracking where people will keep in touch, and then when roles come up, people will then be in touch with them. But that's a good point, and it's something that we could look at on a more formal basis. So thanks for that. That's right. In terms of the homeworking and what we might leave behind, it's been a really interesting one, because literally overnight we went from having probably a few hundred staff who might occasionally work from home to 4,000 staff working from home. And that was obviously a huge transformation for people. And what we've been doing a lot of work, I mentioned in the report about, and we've been doing kind of visible leadership and circle work staff, and some other feet, and you'll see it in the Pulse survey as well, about how happy do you feel about working from home. And I think there are 80% current working arrangements, and the things that staff are telling us are, I for me, but actually it's really worked well. I'm saving 2 hours of my life through not commuting, not travelling to work, the stress of going on buses and trains, and I've got my life back. And what I feel is, whilst it might be more intense working like this, and I might be working harder, I actually feel less because of that. So a lot of us that it's working really, really well for us, for them. So I think that's probably that piece of work that we're contemplating at the moment, in terms of covering and having those conversations with that says, do you want to be physically covered into a building, or are you happy to continue to work from home? Because obviously that not only helps with the climate change, got all the staff back on the roads, but it also helps with our buildings and perhaps and making buildings work better for our people, and maybe sharing buildings, things like that. So it's been really interesting to see the impact of home working, and probably, everybody back in the office 5 days a week, stuck for 2 hours on the M62 or whatever it might be. I think those days are probably well left behind if we can really sort of harness the home working.
So can I just come back in one more time, Chair?
Of course, yeah.
Thank you. And I think as I was reading this, I was thinking, well, this is such a good approach, and such an exciting kind of piece of work. That is there any way of sharing this with our local businesses, and as a principal, and getting them on board and saying, we're doing this piece of work. Is there anything that you can find useful in this? Mm-hmm. And it's just because if everybody does a bit of this, everybody's lives are going to improve, really, aren't they? So just a thought about how we're sort of sharing this among our partners. That's all.
Yeah. No. Again, that's really good, and I'll talk to Chris Duffield about how we might be able to share this with some of our businesses. That again, that's a good point. One thing I would add as well is what we have seen since March is we've seen sickness absence levels sort of kind of tumble almost. I think the average number of days was up at around about 11 and a half. I think it's down to 10 and a half now. So sickness absence has really improved over this period of time, and staff are telling us that they feel better. So that's another positive.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Homewood.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. The first one was just on the bit that you'd mentioned about digital inclusion, and I know you referred to some of the low-paid staff and the frontline staff potentially realising that there was a need there. Can I just check, is that in relation specifically to training that the council provides and equipment that the council provides, or is that also related to the fact that perhaps some of our low-paid staff don't have, say, broadband connections at home and things like that? And the reason I just ask that is because particularly we've seen through schools and what's happening to children is that there's actually a pretty high proportion of households that don't, for example, have broadband. And obviously if we're looking at working from home, that's quite difficult for a lot of people. And just thinking about if that is going to be much more the future of what happens, it does cut out a lot of people out of the workforce potentially. And it kind of goes back to what Councillor Taylor was saying about that working class perhaps worker people from the lower income thresholds who don't currently have the right, they may have some form of internet, but it's not good enough to work from home, for example. So I think it would just be interesting to know how that impacts, and I think, although not part of your portfolio, I guess, but what the council's doing more broadly on digital inclusion, because I think that's something that's quite a key thing that's coming out of COVID in terms of how we kind of support the recovery and support the community going forward. And then the second bit was just on recruitment. So obviously you've mentioned about some of the stuff we're doing around sort of like blind recruitment and some of the schemes we've got that all sound really good. The only thing I was just going to check is, how do we ensure that the recruitment panels that we do have, that they are representative? Because I appreciate that doing a blind recruitment would help, but obviously, you know, when you're recruiting somebody, whether it's the way that they write, the experiences that they have, you're kind of, naturally biased, aren't you, towards people perhaps who are similar to you. And that can have an impact in recruitment, I guess. It's not necessarily, it could be based on ethnicity or class or background or whatever. But unless you kind of have a diverse voice in terms of who's recruiting, that you might still fall into those pitfalls. So I just wondered if there's anything we do there to make sure that we don't just have, an all male panel, an all white panel, or female panel, whatever it might be. Do we have people who sit on panels from externally to help us with recruitment? So yeah, if anything you can provide on that would be helpful.
Okay, so in terms of the recruitment, I will ask my colleague Michelle Mosses. She's here, so I'll ask Michelle to come in and give you some details around recruitment. But if I just take the digital question first. So part of this, you'll see when it comes out that the Pulse 3 survey, the focus this time is going to be around digital inclusion, as I mentioned previously. And what that's going to do is we want to try and understand how digitally sort of enabled our workforce are, and also understand, do they have devices? What do they do? It's almost, what are they using on a personal level? And what that will do is that, yes, it will inform us in terms of what we might provide as a solution in terms of that workforce engagement. But what we're also going to do is we want to understand, is there anything further we might do? And again, it comes back to the point that you made about the general population being digitally enabled and included, and links back into poverty, and looking at whether it's something that as an employer we might be able to perhaps provide that, so that those people, those families in our communities are more digitally enabled in terms of perhaps having broadband, having devices, but also having that kind of wider learning and development about how to use digital platforms. So it won't just be restricted to looking at the sort of workforce solution. We are going to use the intelligence to inform a wider piece, so that we can try and improve those digital outcomes for our staff who live in our communities as well. Michelle, are you able to switch on and just talk a bit about the stuff that we're doing about recruitment and recruitment panels?
Yeah, morning everybody. In terms of recruitment and recruitment panels, the blind recruitment that we're about to introduce, I think a lot of things around the system give us sort of the foundations from which to build, and we'll hopefully remove some unconscious bias. But absolutely hear what you're saying. It's not a panacea that's going to solve everything. So some of the things that we're looking at is looking at the general learning and development offer around recruitment for our recruiting managers. So refreshing that approach and incorporating some more around unconscious bias as part of that offer to our recruiting managers. But practically around panels, I know particular relevance to some of you here, at an executive level, we are actively looking to make sure that we involve the networks in those senior level appointments. So we're starting to engage with that, and that's already starting to happen. So involving networks in those senior level appointments. I think I absolutely, panels need to be as representative as possible. So that's something that we need to kind of make sure that we're working with managers on to make sure that they do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything more to add, Deborah?
No, that's it. Thanks, Michelle.
So a few questions from me. I looking through this, the previous people strategy 2017 to 2020. I'm thinking about the refresh and just wondering. I didn't spot it anywhere, but how long is the refresh to last for? Is one question I've got, because you look at this and think the world could be very different in a year's time or 2 years' time, and how we work with that will probably mean that we may want to review it in 2 years or 1 year or whatever. So I'd welcome your thoughts on. I welcome your thoughts on that. Looking through the Pulse survey, really interesting to see what's going on with staff and how they're feeling. And I think actually going through the process of asking staff how they're feeling is really valuable. It shows that we do care. So I think that's important. But worrying that 12% stated their mental health was either not good or very poor. And of course, the wellbeing survey anonymous. And so I'm wondering how we actually address that, and also staff who felt that they weren't engaged with their managers as well. And so you're talking around roughly 1/10 of the workforce, which, give or take, are not happy in some shape or form, either with their employment or generally with the way things are operating. So I'm just wondering if we've reflected on that and worked out how we might do that. Just one other thing, workplaces, there's home workplaces and obviously there's workplaces. I'm just wondering whether there's opportunities to work across authority, to say, the Calderdale Embassy in Huddersfield, where staff can effectively go and work from a Kirklees office, and the same applying over in Halifax or Bradford or Leeds or Barnsley, wherever it happens to be, and whether there is some scope there for people who need an office and environment, who need that but don't want to travel as far, whether there might be some reciprocal arrangements there, which might be helpful for staff. So just a few quick thoughts there, and thanks for the report. Yeah.
Thank you. So in terms of the wellbeing, I've got my colleague Jane Healy, who leads on wellbeing. I've got her on the line, so I will ask Jane to come in on the wellbeing. But if I take the other 2 points first, in terms of the final point, absolutely. As we're looking at how we might recover people back to office space and where they might go, and the opportunity for shared spaces, certainly looking at working with partners. So for example, as you say, somebody may live in Bradford and need to go into an office, so it's looking at an opportunity that we might have an arrangement with Bradford whereby our staff and indeed their staff may go into a Bradford office if they need to, rather than having to do that travel, that commute into Huddersfield, into Dewsbury, wherever their original work base might have been. So that's absolutely part of the current discussion about how we do that. So that's that point. The first point that you made about the timescale, absolutely. Who'd have thought we'd be? I wouldn't never have thought that the work that we're doing at the moment would have looked like this. Even going back just to February. So what we're doing is we're working really closely to align this with the corporate plan, and the idea is that it probably will be 12 months. So we will kind of formally launch the refresh, what it looks like. As I said, in January, this is kind of working towards it. And then it's the work within it is going to, it's kind of an iterative process anyway. It's going to be changing constantly as we kind of come through the crisis. But the idea is that it probably will be for 12 months, and then we will do a formal refresh again, because the focus of this is very much through a COVID lens at the moment, and how we're working through the pandemic. So in short terms, probably about 12 months. Jane, did you want to come in on the well-being and the mental health and stuff that you've got planned around that? Jane, are you there?
Use the put camera on, and I didn't.
Yeah, she is.
So mental health. So when we talk about mental health, we kind of talk about a blanket approach. So in the employee healthcare unit, what we're actually trying to do is drill down to understand more about why people have mental ill health. So is it because of financial worries? Is it because they're lonely? Is it a social aspect? Is it physical? Is it pain? Is it chronic pain? So we're doing a wellbeing deep dive at the moment to look at understanding what is actually meant by mental health. Especially in the workplace.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. I'm sure that's fine. Any further questions for Deborah at all about this? No. Okay. We obviously are not having the tackling inequalities item. That will be dealt with later. So thanks, Deborah, for that. Let's put our cameras on again so we can all see each other. Maybe Deborah won't, but there we go.
I may crash out at this point.
Fair dues. Okay, so next we have the Tackling Poverty Action Plan. And is it Christina to present on this? Hello.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Hello, this is Lucy.
Oh, hi, Lucy.
Hiya. I'll just need to share. Just bear with me.
Okay, still bearing with you.
Yeah. It's coming. Can you see anything yet?
No, just
thinking about it.
Is one of those little sort of time. Oh, here we are.
Can you see that?
Gotcha.
Right, brilliant. I'll crack on then. So, hello, I'm Lucy. I work in public health. So I'm here to talk to you today about our approach to tackling poverty. This has been a joint piece of work really between public health and policy, but you've got me today. So what I'm going to talk to you about is basically what our approach to poverty has been, sharing that in the national and the local context, and then also taking a look at basically our pre-COVID and our post-COVID response, because obviously the world has turned on its head since March. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was how the language that we use around poverty and how we frame poverty, because that's really important. So we know that poverty is about so much more than just not having enough money, and we really want to frame poverty in that way. We know that poverty is about a lack of opportunity, it's about a lack of choice, and the impact that has on people's dignity is really quite significant. We know that there's a huge stigma around poverty. People may not want to talk about, quite rightly, the situations, but also people who are living in poverty might not even recognise that they are living in poverty, because it's the way that they live and it's the way that they cope and they kind of get by. So there's loads of definitions of poverty, and some of them are really clinical. But we like this one from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, because really it describes nicely how poverty is just so much more than money. It's that broad impact that it has across somebody's life, for individuals, for families, and for communities. So I just wanted to kind of frame the discussion within that initially.
Okay.
So moving on, this is basically an infograph of what I've just discussed. So, I mean, this won't be new to you, obviously. We know that poverty has a significant impact across all aspects of people's lives. So housing, not just homelessness, but poor housing, unsafe housing, cold homes, the kind of hidden homeless, sofa surfing, those kind of things. Health, obviously alcohol and drug problems can be impacted by poverty, but also broader physical and mental problems. The mental health thing is really important. As I've already said, the stigma around poverty is quite significant. Personal issues, the weight and the burden of living in poverty, the burden that has on people's lives obviously has a massive impact on relationship and family problems. And we know that children who are born into or who grow up living in poverty are much less likely to achieve their full potential at school. So it's obviously very complex. This is about the need in Kirklees. So just sharing some intelligence. It's really important to say that this intelligence is pre-COVID. So obviously we know that COVID's had a massive impact, and we're still looking at the kind of the national and the local impact that has had on people living in poverty. But I wanted to share this because it gives some of the context of the issues that we're facing, really. So we know that around 1 in 6 Kirklees residents are currently living in poverty, and around 1 in 5 children are living in poverty. Around 13% of people experience fuel poverty, and around 1 in 20 people are unemployed. Obviously, that will have changed since COVID. Something which isn't on this slide, which I need to mention, is about the use of food banks. So we have a kind of a formal relationship with 3 of our food banks in Kirklees, although there's many others. And what the food banks have reported to us pre-COVID is a significant increase in people's use of food banks. Also, what they're telling us is that a few years ago, food banks might have been used as a kind of a one-off crisis intervention for people. What they're seeing now is an increased number of people who are kind of returning to the food banks. So it's less of a crisis response. It's more of a way of coping and surviving, that people need to continue to use food banks. Post-COVID, this has come from a report from the Social Metrics Commission. Again, this won't be a huge surprise to you. So groups who were already overrepresented in terms of living in poverty have been most impacted by COVID. So that includes people who are living in deprivation, people who have a disability, and BAME communities, for example. We also know that there's significant differences basically in terms of what job you have. So 81% of people who are living working in hospitality are more likely to be negatively impacted compared to people in financial services. And also, there's been a shift in terms of people who are experiencing poverty. So people who may have been kind of just about managing before, and now because their employment status has changed, they've been shifted, they've moved into living in poverty. So there's people who have not had that experience before who have moved into living and at risk of living in poverty. So the Kirklees approach, we've been working on this for around 18 months now, and just wanted to frame it initially in terms of that people's, partners, places, obviously. So in terms of people, what's really important to us in our approach is about that lived experience. So making sure that we work with people who have lived experience of poverty and that they can shape and influence what we do. So we've said here, no decision about me without me. I mean, it's like anything that we do in public health or across the council. We need to make sure that we are working with people who have that lived experience, because they can tell us directly what works and what doesn't work for them. So it's really important that that's kind of embedded through this this piece of work. Partnerships, obviously they're really key, and even more so now than ever. We have a tackling poverty partnership, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So we absolutely know that as a council we cannot do this on our own. It has to be a partnership approach. So we want to recognise and build on the good work which was happening post COVID, but obviously has been accelerated since COVID. And then places. So we know that your experience of poverty will vary wildly depending on where you live in Kirklees. So if you live in an urban area, that's very different to what your experience might be in a rural area. So we need to make sure that we're kind of thinking about that in our approach as well. So just to give you some history to what we've been doing pre-lockdown. So because of the need to work in partnership, we have established a tackling poverty partnership, and we wanted to make sure that that was as representative as possible of communities across Kirklees and organisations across Kirklees. So currently the partnership membership includes colleagues from health, from business, from the local VCS and community organisations, and from the university. And we really wanted to think about what our focus should be for this, because obviously poverty and all of the interweaving issues are so huge. So as a partnership, what we want to do is to look at what we can do locally to ameliorate the impact of poverty. So that's kind of our focus. We've worked with the partnership to kind of tease out some of the key themes which the partnership think will make the most difference to our residents in Kirklees, and that includes things like income maximisation. So how are we enabling people to either through good work, good quality work, or through making sure people are on the right benefits, credit unions, better off Kirklees, all those kinds of things to make sure that people have got enough money coming in. The crisis support is really important. I've already talked about the food banks, but there's also feedback that when people are in a crisis, it can often be a very difficult system to navigate. People don't always know where to turn. It can be quite clunky. People have to go to different bits of the system to access the support that they need. So that's something that we need to think about. And also communications. So that's in terms of how we communicate together as a partnership, how we communicate what we do well, because there is already a significant amount of work which is happening. Communications in terms of how people can help, but also how we communicate with the public, and the language that goes back to the language and the language around poverty, and making sure that any communications we have with our residents is appropriate and meaningful for them. So that's where we were kind of up to. And then obviously COVID struck. So myself and my colleague from policy, we were kind of moved into the community response team. And actually the past few months, even though the formal poverty work, obviously it paused, we've been doing a significant amount of work during that time directly related to poverty, which has actually put us in a better position than we were in before. So I was kind of focusing on food and welfare as part of the community response. So a lot of the work that I was doing was basically around making sure that people across Kirklees had access to food. So whether that was through the mutual aid groups or VCS, through food banks, through food vouchers, it was really about making sure that there was an equitable access to food. And what we were really pleased with was that actually there was a choice in how people could access that food. So it wasn't just about the food banks, although obviously that's an option, and it's about that dignity of choice. And I think the relationship that we have with the food banks now is much stronger than it was before. So you might know already that in terms of the delivery of food, obviously that had to stop when we went into lockdown. So people couldn't visit the food banks anymore. So we offered K&H and local welfare have been delivering that food directly to people's homes. Our relationship with local welfare provision has is much better, much stronger than it was before, and also the VCS and the mutual aid groups is just proof that there's local community organisations. They can reach parts of Kirklees which the council can't always reach, and it's really important that we recognise that and we build on those strong relationships. So what next? We need to make sure that our poverty work is integrated into the inequalities work, because poverty is one element of inequality. So we're working hard to make sure that this piece of work is integrated into that, because absolutely what we don't want to do is to have two different silos, two different pieces of work. So we're working with colleagues together to make sure that we can bring that together. I've already talked about the lived experience, so that's really important. So we're just exploring options for how we can make that happen in terms of making sure that people who have lived experience of poverty are able to kind of co-produce what we do going forward. And then also we want to continue to work with the partnership to explore post COVID poverty issues, because we're really only just beginning to understand what those issues are. So we need to continue to work with the partnership, but also strengthen the partnership, because what we recognise is that the partnership as it is, there's a really good attendance, but at the minute it's not currently representative of all the communities across Kirklees. So we also want to make sure that our partnership is as diverse as the communities that we have in Kirklees. And I think, yep, that's it. Now, there we go.
Okay, thanks for that, Lucy. So over to members. Let's see, have we got any particular questions coming from members here on that presentation? Can't spot any putting their hand up yet. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Chair. Just on food banks, we heard quite a bit about food banks there, and Lucy, it seems to be a bit of a speciality of yours. That seems to be an area of your expertise, which is good. What we found, we set up in Cleckheaton, we set up a food bank with the local Churches Together organisation, and we found, I was surprised and absolutely delighted with the amount of volunteers that came to drive those food parcels out to people once it was once it was set up, because there was no counter service, because that was inappropriate, it wasn't safe. So we designed a delivery service. Now, many of these people hadn't volunteered before, so it was great to see this kind of new draft of volunteers, sort of this new influx. Now, what became apparent though, that nearly all of them were on furlough. And of course, with furloughs coming to an end, that kind of flexible workforce, if you like, that kind of resource, that community resource, is kind of ebbing away. Now, you might say, well, that that's okay. We can go back to a counter service at food banks and all will be well. But that's not really how it was set up. It was set up to have those volunteers in place. It's volunteer run. So I'm just wondering how we square that circle between having discovered a willing workforce, if you like, a willing resource, to have that kind of ebb away, and what strategies we have to retain that goodwill and that resource. The other thing that I'd say is that when we talk about poverty and areas of poverty, we've got this kind of rather broad brushstroke approach of rural and urban, which both have the characteristics. I would also say that there are areas that I remember during one of the children's reviews in the borough that we met with officers and explained that actually locally we have street by street areas of short-term rents, or quality housing in some circumstances. But that goes street by street. That goes by almost house by house, where you have people in rather dire circumstances rubbing shoulders, next door neighbours with people who are quite well off, in fact, and not struggling at all. They are articulate. They get better health results because they can talk to the doctors and express what the problems are in a kind of more articulate way, and so on and so forth. Where the whole things are well rehearsed. But I think that's just worth looking at. Is just that granular detail of just where our poverty lies in the borough, and what we can do to sort of really identify where that is.
Okay. Any response to that, Lucy?
Yep. Totally get where you're coming from around the volunteers, and that was a massive issue right at the beginning, because a lot of the volunteers who worked for the three main food banks were all kind of in the vulnerable category, so they couldn't work. So we had to kind of like draft in public health staff to work in those. And I think longer term, like you were saying, there was an amazing initial response to for volunteers across Kirklees wanting to help, and then that's obviously kind of started to trickle away as people are going back to work. And I think what we need to do, and I think what is planned to do, although I don't have the details of it, is around making sure that we still harness the volunteer response that we have across Kirklees. And I'm pretty sure, Andy, are you here? I'm pretty sure that is happening. But I can certainly take that away, because we need to make sure that we build on that brilliant response that we had with the people who are still able to volunteer. Andy, are you able to add to any of that?
Yes, well, thank you to Councillor also for the point, and yeah, you're absolutely right. As Lucia said, it's something that we're aware of and working on. We're quite keen to make sure that what we don't do is have to deal with the next phase, or the next if there is a second phase of COVID, for example, that it is something of a surprise, and therefore another emergency response. So it's absolutely, how do we learn from what we've put in place, how we can continue to engage volunteers and the community in that space, so that it becomes the norm rather than an exception. So yes, absolutely acknowledging, and that work is going in the background, talking with communities colleagues this morning actually about that as an example.
Okay. Councillor Homewood.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, John mentioned this just now, but I just wanted to know where housing comes into this strategy. Maybe it's part of wider inequalities work, but I just think particularly in terms of sort of low quality private rented housing is a real problem. And I certainly find that, as lots of people obviously can't get social housing, are in private rented accommodation, which is probably overpriced and of poor quality. And certainly I find that our kind of private sector housing team at the council, probably through, I guess, lack of resource, really struggle to really intervene much in that. I find that we don't really, we struggle to get anywhere in terms of holding anybody to account in some of the situations that we find. And I think this needs to be a real a real focus, because you're kind of stuck in that trap of poverty, you know, regardless of income as well, to a certain extent. So that would be something I'd be interested to know. And then just following on a bit around how we kind of understand where the poverty is and target, I do think we're improving on that. But I think historically, particularly in some of the funding that we see as councillors, so much of it is based on kind of wards and how much money should go to each ward and things like that, where actually we need more targeted intervention in the areas with the highest need. And I think that is happening more now, but I still think we need to think about that a little bit, really targeting it, because I just feel sometimes it's just to keep everybody happy rather than actually deal with the problems that are there. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to answer your first point around housing, yes, housing is part of it, and you're right, it's also part of the broader inequalities work as well. Without not being a housing expert, but I do know that I think they're looking at the housing strategy again to refresh that in light of COVID, and also the private rented sector. I mean, I know that comes up time and time again in terms of issues, and I think how it has been historically is that the colleagues from that team, it's basically firefighting, so they can only respond to what's been reported to them. So it's that prevention element as well, and I know that that is something that they're looking at more broadly as part of the inequalities work as well. Andy, do you need to add to that?
Yeah, if I could briefly add, if that's okay, Chair. Councillor Homewood, raise an absolutely important point, and you said it yourself, really. And I was going to add it to what Lucy had said in terms of the presentation. We see and will recommend to councillors that poverty is a part of inequalities overall. It is just one aspect of a larger picture, unfortunately, how the items have turned out today, clearly in the later discussion that we will have, we will present how that connects. Housing is clearly another one of those areas that is significantly affected. We've already picked that up in terms of the planning, and that will feature in what will be a refreshed action plan for inequalities and for poverty. Is the reason why Lucy's not gone through a detailed action plan today is because, as was also covered in Deborah's presentation, the impact of COVID and the recent work to tie these things together for what we do over the next 12 months means that needs refreshing, and we'll pick that up through that route.
Okay, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lucy and Andy, for that presentation. Number of comments, really. My first point was picking up that bit about poverty in rural and in urban areas being very, very different, and I think my experience representing a more rural ward is sometimes it's more hidden, and it's more difficult to find because people don't tend to be as open about the challenges that they face. And I think John Lawson was right in that it can be very specific, and it can be individual households, it can be individual streets. It's not as broad an area, and that just reflects, it comes back to James's point, that tends to reflect the housing. What I see in my ward, some of the poverty is actually asset rich but cash poor, where you have elderly people who have very small pensions and very small income and are very, very proud, but maybe living in quite a largish house, and they sometimes are very, very difficult to reach because they don't come forward very easily. But also when we talk about poverty, and I think, to Andy's point, sometimes we need to remember that poverty is just an element of inequality, rather than because you can focus everything on poverty in terms of income, where actually it's much broader than that, and it's about access to services. It is, as James says, it's access to adequate housing. It's also about education and how that then flows through into skills and employment opportunities. So actually, a lot of it for me is you go back to education, and all of the others flow from poor outcomes as a result of perhaps not having achieved as much as one was possibly able to if you'd been given better earlier support. So for me, a lot of this, and I guess, Andy, this will come back to the broad piece about inequalities, is the earlier we start to tackle some of these things and identify these things, the better the outcomes are going to become longer term for those individuals. But yeah, I welcome the update, and I'll say, Andy, look forward to the broader piece about the inequalities work that we started to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's agree with. Yeah, totally agree with everything that you just said. The point around the rural and it being more hidden and more difficult to find. Yeah, we found that as well. And I think that goes back to the need, that kind of lived experience, and how important it is to that as part of this approach. It's that lived experience of people who have had of poverty, and understanding that people's experiences of poverty are very, very different, and not taking a broad brush approach. And obviously totally agree with everything that you just said around inequalities, and obviously like that will be picked up in another session.
If I could very briefly add, we use a horrible word that is intersectionality, so I won't use it again. What that means is exactly the point. It is recognizing that people's lives are impacted by multiple of these sorts of factors, and we need to be conscious of the connections between them to really be able to make a difference. The last thing I would add is public health colleagues have done a fantastic piece of work to present almost a life journey of, as you were describing, Councillor Taylor, for how it impacts them, how these factors impact upon people's lives at different stages of their lives, and we will certainly bring that forward in what we bring to the informal session.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Chair. One area I think would highlight is the fact that with the furlough coming to an end, a lot of people might not be going back into work because the work won't be available, and that's going to increase. And I'm hoping that some way your sort of planning allows for the fact that that'll be another crisis that you can't measure at the moment, but that you're aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've kind of been working with Christopher and the work that he's doing around the kind of economic recovery to make sure that we join that up. But yeah, it's kind of what I was saying earlier around that new kind of cohort of people who will be at risk of living in poverty because their economic circumstances have changed. But yeah, totally recognise that.
Thank you. And the other thing, could we have a copy of your slides, please?
Yep.
Okay, good stuff. Philip asked the question I was going to ask, which was about the poverty tsunami that could well hit us over the next few months. So that's fine. Okay, thanks for that, everybody. So next item, leaving the EU. This is something called Brexit. People may be familiar with it. It's what we talked about before COVID-19. There's always something that's on the news all the time, isn't there? So is it over to you, Chris?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. Obviously, you've had the paper from colleagues in advance, so I'm just going to kind of run through the salient points. This was in response to some sort of outstanding issues that were highlighted by this panel at its meeting on the 28th of February. So this is largely a response to those specific questions. So in terms of national context, obviously the Chair just alluded to it. Leaving the EU is clearly becoming much more central to the current debate. We know there are a number of outstanding issues that are being focused on at the moment in terms of the free trade agreement with the EU relating to state aid, fishing, and obviously the implementation of the withdrawal agreement. Locally, in a sort of practical perspective, the tactical group is still meeting to kind of review and understand, in particular, implications for both businesses and Kirklees residents, and we're continuing to have ongoing engagement with key partners, including the Chamber, the Federation of Small Businesses and the LEP in relation to particularly the support that we can offer to businesses, both to mitigate any risks and also to take up opportunities which may arise. So specifically, just briefly picking up on the matters that you asked us to focus on back in February. The report picks up on the current status of the applications for settled status for those looked after children that the council is responsible for, who are also EU citizens. As you can see, I'm pleased to say that 4 of the 5 applications for settled status have been submitted. We understand that there are some, perhaps inevitably, the timeframes for determination have been extended a bit by the virus, which is unfortunate. Normally, it's an 8-week turnaround, and we're currently resubmitting one of those applications. So obviously we're very hopeful that there will be positive outcomes for all 5 of those young people involved. The second issue, and again, there's quite a detailed appendix to the report that picks up on this as well. So I'll just focus on the headlines. Second issue was very much updating the analysis of export and import destinations in relation to sort of ongoing movement in terms of negotiating free trade agreements. I think important point to make that we have a set of national and regional trade statistics which are based on I guess actual movement of goods through our existing import and export arrangements. So we in the report we're focusing on those particularly regional statistics rather than any local data. It's not possible for us to break down the data into to a Kirklees geography, unfortunately, but I think we can be reasonably confident that there's a degree of proxy that we can apply to those regional figures for the at the local level, just because of the kind of similarities of our economic structure, etc. So briefly then, in terms of the kind of current position at regional level, that regional trade data is showing that 51.7% of imports are from the EU or EU countries, with obviously the balance from non-EU, and a higher proportion of exports. So 57% of exports from regional businesses are to the EU. So that's important context. What we've then looked at is, in particular, imports and exports from non-EU countries to try and get a measure of how those sit in terms of either agreed or likely to be agreed free trade agreements. And there's, Jonathan's pulled together a lot of data both in the report and in the appendix. I guess the sort of headlines to focus on: 35.5% of imports from non-EU countries are either subject to or are subject to free trade, a free trade agreement which has already been signed or is very much anticipated. So 35.5% of exports, of imports are from countries where we can anticipate that a free trade agreement will be in place. A further 14.4% of imports, again from non-EU countries, are from those nations where we're expecting to have a mutual recognition agreement, which is kind of, I guess, less ideal than a free trade agreement, but it still provides a degree of certainty. And then the balance, so just over 50% of those non-EU imports are likely to be subject to international WTO rules. And then dealing with imports, again, we've got a slightly different picture. So in terms, sorry, I will stop conflating imports and exports. That's really unhelpful for members. So dealing with exports from non-EU countries at regional level, currently about 25% of exports are from countries or two countries that we expect to have an FTA in place. 30.3% of exports are to countries that we expect to have a mutual recognition agreement, and a slightly lower proportion, so 44.7%, are to those where we expect WTO rules will apply. And again, a lot of detail in the report that I'm sure we can come back to. Moving on to the next item in the report, it was to pick up specifically on the issue of business confidence and generally what all of this means and how businesses are feeling at this stage. In a local context, we did quite a large survey of businesses back in June. Surveyed a very large number that are on the council's database and had a reasonable response. So just over 760 respondents to that survey. As I think, as you alluded to, Chair, we've obviously been primarily focused on the virus and those related impacts. So it would be wrong to say that this was a leaving the EU focused survey, but there is some material that we can certainly draw from it, which is picked up in the report. So in essence, as you would expect, back in June, very high levels of concern around the likelihood of both a UK and global recession at that point. So around 73% of respondents were very concerned about the prospect of entering a recession back in June. Slightly lower proportion, 48% were particularly concerned about future trade and regulation and tax issues, and that proportion increased to 56% of the sample of manufacturers that we surveyed. And at that stage, a smaller proportion, 37%, were concerned about the potential impacts on their supply chain, not specifically just relating to leaving the EU, but obviously in a kind of wider economic context as well. We plan to do a further business survey in October. Clearly, there are a number of reasons for that. One is that I think, as was alluded to earlier, the furlough scheme will be winding down at that stage, and therefore we're looking to get a much clearer understanding of potential impact on redundancies. And this also gives us, I think, a good opportunity at that point, early in October, to revisit some of these issues around leaving the EU, particularly as the position around the free trade agreement with the EU should have moved on by that point. So finally, then Chair, and just briefly, there was a further couple of issues you had asked us to look at in relation to, particularly in relation to social care and any impact that the sort of issues around settled status for EU citizens might have on the workforce. Survey work that we did in 2018 showed that around 2% of the adult social care workforce were EU citizens at that time, although surveys of some providers suggest that in some cases that proportion can increase to between 5 and 10%. So helpful context for us in that sense. Specifically, what we have seen, and sort of pages 4 and 5 of the report pick this up, we have seen a very significant increase in numbers of people who are approaching into care. This is a service which is trying to match care jobs with employers, we've seen respondents or the sort of interest and applications to Intercare increase quite significantly, certainly during the first part of lockdown, and also the Works Better program that I manage, which is providing employment support to people who are long-term unemployed or are at risk of young people are at risk of being NEET. We're certainly working very closely with Intercare to help match individuals into work in the sector at the moment. And then I think finally, Chair, there was I guess a general question around wider update on the economic and social impacts of transition, including those that extend beyond the council's remit. I think I touched on the kind of ongoing position in terms of negotiation of the free trade agreement with the EU at the moment. Not planning to return to that necessarily, but worth noting that certainly as of the end of June, we'd had applications from nearly 9,400 of the 13,000 or so Kirklees residents who we think are eligible for settled status. As you can imagine, council's working with a number of organisations and partners to make sure, and businesses, to make sure that we are promoting, the importance of resolving that issue and making information available to those partner organisations and employers to ensure that we reach out as widely as possible and ensure that as many EU citizens as possible are applying for settled status. I think that's probably it for me for now, Chair, but obviously very happy to pick up on questions.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. Members? Philip, you are on mute.
At the appendix, it's quite interesting that you've got, for the Yorkshire and Humber at least, an indication of the value of goods imports and exports. With Yorkshire and Humber, how much of the service industry will be, as it were, export or import either to non-EU or EU countries? Do we have any sort of indication of that? Because services is still quite a large part of the UK economy.
Yeah, Jonathan, I don't know if you in particular wanted to pick up on that one.
To be honest, we've not looked at the service analysis. I'm just wondering whether there was some detail in the initial intelligence that I looked at from that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority have done previously, but I'd have to look that up and get back to you on that.
That would be helpful, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Chair. Just one or two points to pick up. Thanks for the report. It's brought everything back to the group that I thought it might. On the 5 looked after children with looking for settled status, I'm actually quite frustrated, and I'm sure officers are as well. We're all corporate parents after all, and we'd like to see their status settled as soon as possible. We've been at this a little while, and it's quite distressing to think that they are stuck in a pigeonhole somewhere in a government pigeonhole somewhere. COVID isn't going anywhere. Neither is Brexit, and Brexit is the rock upon which this will crash. This isn't going anywhere. So, if there is any way to chase these things down, any way to sort of put pressure on anything we can do to speed up the process, then I'd urge us to do it. Simply because to have 5 children in our care with their future uncertain is not acceptable. unacceptable.
Yeah.
The second point I'd make is in the assessment of local business confidence. I just picked up one thing here, which was in line with results from previous surveys. Only 27% of businesses had business continuity plans in place, and it does remark that there are 37 in the manufacturing sector. I just wanted to pick that up and just say, you know, in light of the second paragraph on the previous page, page 47, where it talks about Yorkshire and Humber trades predominantly with the EU, and then gives a stack of facts and figures there. In light of that, have we been given any guidance for local businesses from MHCLG or HMRC or the RAF even, I don't know who, but have we been given any guidance on local businesses for those continuity plans? So that's just see if there's anything official there. The last point that I would sorry to load all these at once, but I don't really want to come back again. The last point I'd say is on page 49, where we talk about medicines and supply of medication. We say the supply of medication to care homes has not been tested, as this is an NHS Public Health England responsibility. I'd say this is our responsibility. These are our residents, and we need to push back and really kind of be on the NHS's case to sort of show us they're working out and convince us and reassure us that this medication will be forthcoming and they can guarantee it. And I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any comeback on that at all, Chris?
Certainly, in terms of the point absolutely noted in terms of around the looked after children and as you'd expect, we'll take that away, and obviously very happy to come back and confirm following the meeting the actions that we've been able to put in place in terms of chasing up those specific cases. In terms of Councillor Lawson's second point, at this stage we have not, to my knowledge, had any specific advice from MHCLG around business continuity, obviously in relation to the emerging free trade agreement. Clearly, there was and has been advice provided around the withdrawal agreement when that was negotiated. And in terms of the third point, again, simply to say at this stage, it's kind of out with my remit in that sense, but we'll take that away and again clarify the position in terms of the issue that you raised. And unless Jonathan, you can shed any further light on that last point.
No, we would need to check in with colleagues that have been leading this work.
Okay. So, Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, just a quick one around the application for settled status for the 5 children. It might be, if we are struggling to get those progressed, it may be worth speaking to the local MPs because they have back channels that can help. They can only deal with those in, children that are living in their constituency. But I know just because of the work that I do, and I'm sure James will, wherever he is, similarly has similar experience, that we can probably help Chris if that's needed. If you want to feed that back, it might be a way of perhaps progressing that if they are hitting problems. And that was my only comment, to be honest, Chair.
Yeah, that's a good call. Okay, so thanks for that. Well, I've got not much to say about this other than dismay, really, about the fact that this is an avoidable crisis. But there we go. But that's too late, as far as we're all concerned. So there we go. Thanks for the report, Chris. Any further comments before we close the meeting? Let's see. Right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. Much appreciated. We will now cease the broadcast. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.